school where Jim teaches, and listening to Adam's story of the reply to the email, I thought about it. In the program, there is a map of his bombing runs, his bombing missions in World War II. And I remember one morning, the first morning he was coming to the school to speak. And I thought, we've got to have a map for the students to see to really make it make sense. And I knew it wouldn't be enough just to put a map of Europe up on the wall and say, kind of here, sort of here, maybe here. I spent 3 hours making this slide. It's a PowerPoint slide. Because I was checking maps to find detail, making sure my circles were exact. Because I knew Bob would check it. And I knew he would say something if I was totally wrong. So I spent my whole morning at school, because I didn't have any classes, but I spent 3 hours in one slide. Normally it takes me about 5 minutes to make a slide, but this one took a while. I put some time into it. If it wasn't for Bob Stewart, Dwight Eisenhower, and millions of others of Americans, the Nazis may have never been defeated. And at least that's what I was taught growing up the last score of years during the Cold War. And of course, millions of other school kids were taught that the Soviet Union needed to be thankful for a democracy saving their communist hides. 4 years ago, I taught my sophomore students the exact opposite of that in my US history classes. It was the Soviets who defeated the best trained Nazis in Russia and Eastern Europe, and with a belated assist from the Americans in the West who were fighting the least trained German troops. A parent contacted me and was concerned about my facts that I was sharing with our Sturgis students. After all, I was teaching American history. Why am I giving credit to the commies? After several back and forth conversations, I sent the parent numerous citations from esteemed historians who espoused what I taught, that I was teaching it correctly, the current historiography of it. The parent and the student remained convinced are unconvinced, and eventually the debate dropped. 2 years later, that same student who was unconvinced was sitting in one of Bob Stewart's talks, and listened to Bob Stewart speak of his glorious Russian allies, the Soviet soldiers and airmen who tenaciously fought the Luftwaffe. In Bob's words to the students, if it wasn't for the Soviets wearing down the Nazi war machine, the American British airmen would have suffered far greater casualties on the ground and in the air. And perhaps Bob would have never returned, and he understood this, and he imparted that to our students. Bob did return, and in his brief time here in Hyannis, he spoke to several hundred Sturgis students about his experience as a B-17 captain. And as an educator, I appreciated the efforts of Bob because he was able to describe what it was like. Not what he read or not what he heard, he was there. He's the ultimate primary source. He was in the air catching the flak and dodging the enemy aircraft. He was, as I told my students on the eve of his talk, this man deserves your respect. He fought the Nazis. He was there. And his first mission was on D-Day, so listen up. He has a lot to tell you. And they did. I recently contacted one of my former seniors from 2 years ago who was in that room and asked her to share her experience from one of his talks. And I'll let her words honor Bob's memory. And I'll read, this is verbatim. He was historical proof of the incredible tactics and daring of the young men that America sent forth to fight during the war. Moreover, he was also sharp. The brilliant way he explained things had to be one of the most impressive parts of the entire presentation, more than the models and more than the maps. She continued, he was a bright, enthusiastic, and tough old man, and he conducted his speech with such gentle yet genuine authority that one simply had to listen. His speech became a foundation on which my own enthusiasm was based for the education following, particularly World War II and the way warfare was conducted during that time. One experience none of my students forgot was Bob's story about his 21-day drunk. Upon returning from Europe, he told the students flying a bomber dramatically changed his outlook on life. He returned home a pacifist, which he would remain the rest of his life. The impact of Bob's willingness to share his experience is invaluable. I know many other students incorporated what they learned from him into their history coursework. And this is just a small part of Bob's legacy. As for the skeptical student, he finally was convinced of the Soviets' Herculean efforts and relented. I had the good fortune to spend 5 weeks in Russia this summer. And I visited Bob in the hospital about a week before I left for Russia, and about a week before he died. I'm sorry, just a few days before I left, and then he died about a week later. The last thing he asked me to do was to wish his glorious Russian allies, the surviving Soviet veterans, all the best and to drink a toast with them. Unfortunately, I didn't meet any Soviet veterans. I did visit the Great Patriotic War Museum in Moscow. It's their World War II memorial to the 30 million fallen that died in the Soviet Union, and was very impressed by it. I spent 6-7 hours there, and the whole time I was there I thought of Bob, because he had just died 4 days before that. It was on July 8th that I was there. He died July 4th. And while I was there, I just silently thanked the Soviet veterans on Bob's behalf, and I left a donation to the museum in his name, and on the outside of the envelope I just said, to his Bob's glorious Russian allies. Thank you.